What's the biggest AI myth you wish you could delete from the internet?
The biggest is that probably AI is smarter than any human. Before that, actually, before I founded my own consulting business, I worked as a data scientist myself. So I've been working hands-on building.
If you could rename artificial intelligence, what would you call it?
Let's call it profitable intelligence.
Why do you think enterprises are not making profit out of AI? Because I thought AI is awesome. Everyone says it will solve all the problems, so making profit is quite natural. Why did you have to write a book on it? Which industry is secretly the most exciting AI playground right now?
Finance.
In your book, you talk about the AI skills framework. And from your vantage point, how do you see the evolution of this technology?
I launched my own AI consulting firm, Rapid AI, actually, even before.
Can you give some advice, tough love to leaders and businesses on how they should start the new year?
Oh yeah, so what I would say is, however you position yourself in your company, prepare for failure.
Tobias, welcome to Agent Build Expert Exchange.
Yeah, hi Sandy, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. I'm so happy that you're here. I wanted to start with a very simple question. Why do you think enterprises are not making profit out of AI? Because I thought AI is awesome. Everyone says it will solve all the problems, so making profit is quite natural. Why did you have to write a book on it?
Yeah, if it was so natural, then I wouldn't have written a book at it, and then probably there wouldn't be have been so many people who have read and bought the book. So yeah, what I've seen and I've been doing AI consulting now for the past 5 years, that it is really incredibly hard to actually get ROI from AI. What is really easy these days is to purchase AI and to spend money on AI. Has never been easier than that. But to actually get money back from it, or to turn it into your investment into a return, or get returns from that, that's actually it's really hard. And there are lots of different factors that come in, and probably we'll talk about those. But this is what I see. It's nothing that happens automatically.
Makes sense. And just to step back a little bit, before you have written the book, what are the experiences that you have gained over the years, where you came from, and how your experience has evolved over AI that you have come to this position of writing this book?
Yeah, sure. So I would say in the short-term history, or my short-term background, is that I launched my own AI consulting firm, Rapid AI, actually, even before we had large language models and generative AI. So back then it was a lot about building predictive models and helping organizations do with forecasting tasks and so on. And I actually also wrote a first book about it, which was called AI Powered Business Intelligence, together with O'Reilly, which was more focused around how to bring AI into data analytics and these kind of things. And before that, actually, before I founded my own consulting business, I worked as a data scientist myself. So I've been working hands-on building machine learning models and deep learning models, with a particular focus on marketing and customer analytics stuff, churn prediction, next best offer recommendation, but also plain customer segmentation. So these kind of things. But obviously that has evolved, and over the especially last 2 and 3 years, many other new use cases have appeared. And this is what I what makes my own consulting business also so interesting, but also what I think is such a challenge for organizations, is that with the rise of ChatGPT and generative AI in particular, so many potential use cases popped up left and right. And right now, it's really hard to figure out, okay, which of these are, just interesting and maybe a nice and shiny demo, but which of those are actually the ones that actually drive the business needle, and how can you find those cases that actually bring your business forward? So that's the position that I'm in right now, and, how I've been, coming to that position. And I've been always writing for the past 5-6 years. I've been writing online. I have my newsletter that eventually turned into that book that we have today.
Fascinating. In your book, you talk about the AI skills framework. And from your vantage point, how do you see the evolution of this technology? And why do you think the AI of today, that is generative AI, is so valuable for businesses and society?
Yeah, so maybe just to quickly introduce the framework just a little bit. So like we basically have those five, AI skills or AI modes that resemble like pretty much what actually like people would do normally in a business. So we have prediction mode, we have creation mode, we have thinking mode, we have perception mode and agentic mode, which is to, do things in the real world. And I just found that useful to having that kind of framework. And each of these, like, categories has different verbs underneath. Like, prediction mode has, forecasting or classifying and all these things. And perception mode has to read, to see, to hear, and so on. And I think this is just helpful for a lot of people who feel that otherwise AI is being labeled on everything out there. Like everything is AI these days, whether or not it has actually AI built in. So just by questioning, okay, what kind of skill does AI actually bring here to the table? Like, does it predict something? Is it acting on my behalf? Is it perceiving the environment? Like, how does AI actually make a difference in that particular process or in that software, or in that tool? That actually helps. And the way I designed that framework is that under each category, you can actually put a certain technology underneath. So in many of this, it's generative AI in large language models, but that's not the only one. We still have classical AI models that are much better, for example, when it comes to like forecasting time series or like, even doing something like customer churn prediction. So it's still important to have like these things on top of your mind, because those classical AI models that have been there like for a very long time are actually still driving business values, and like businesses are still discovering them every day and figuring out, oh, well, that's actually a good use case that we could have, which maybe does not have anything to do with generative AI. But yeah, generative AI and LLMs just have been, just be so impactful because the threshold to get into this has been so low, and everyone has kind of like used ChatGPT and so before. So the exposure of AI to kind of non-technical people just became so high. That's, why everyone is thinking, okay, that's what AI is, even though it's just like, one part, even though one important one.
You see, when I talk to customers, right, and also I talk to my friends and my family members, there is always this inherent fear of the AI of today taking away jobs and affecting society at large. And on the other side, when you talk to businesses and you introduce a use case, and you cannot really prove return on investment unless you show that the human cost has been reduced somehow by laying off people. And there is kind of this dilemma of, what would actually happen? How would people evolve with this technology? And how would their jobs evolve from the people's sense of view, and from business sense of view? How would they actually make sense of the return on investment? What is your view on that?
So when I look at AI use cases in businesses, I realize that there are two big tracks that are going on. The first track is the, let's call it personal productivity angle, where people have access to AI technology to pull one of the big levers of one of the AI levers, which is to work faster or to, produce higher quality work, or, produce something in a short amount of time, or, just cheaper by, giving away less to like external contractors, for example, or by just being more scalable and doing work that was not scalable before. And if you look at these augmentation parts, I haven't really seen a single use case where, one person made themselves obsolete by, just getting more productive. It's like there's a certain limit to what degree you can, stretch this towards. So in this case, I don't see ChatGPT, especially like this application, replace any people, like at least in an existing organization. But that's just the first track. The second track is more ROI focused. And these are also the use cases that I describe in my book, The Profitable AI Advantage, which are more designed and engineered for profit. And of course, if you want to have profit, well, there are just two ways to achieve that. Like either you get like, the revenue up, or you get the cost down. But these cases typically involve not just taking a human out and then bringing AI in for that human. That typically doesn't work, or at least I haven't seen that, where this one-on-one replacement really happens. But instead, what you try to do is you try to redesign workflows in an age where we have AI now as a technology. So in scenarios where you previously had, the workflow like A, B, C, D, then maybe today the workflow is not A, B, C, D, but, A to D directly. And then you have one person checking in on C occasionally. Or you have certain you have certain products that you can now do that were like totally like unfeasible for you before. But these use cases, they don't just happen. Like, they don't happen by giving people access to Copilot or to ChatGPT. These are use cases that need to be designed and thought of very often top down. So you have to actually identify, okay, where are processes in our organization that are actually not, that competitive anymore, and then go ahead and try to seize that opportunity. And I think like differentiating between those two is really important, because the first one, the personal productivity angle, this affects all of us. So, we all are exposed to these tools and using ChatGPT or not. So, it affects really each and every one of us, at least in knowledge worker fields. And for the second one, it does not affect all of us equally. Like, there are certain areas that are more affected. Of course, like, if you're a translator or if you're in a translation business, your job is more affected than, with these AI tools than, let's say, carpenters, right? So we have different, we have different things. So even though like both of them might be exposed to AI because they use that tool on a daily basis, the impact on their job is like massively different. And just sorting those two things out, and then being able as an organization to find a good answer for the second category of, what that means for your organization. And this ties back to identifying the overall strategy, or the overall, what I call North Star of approaching AI for you. So what are you really looking for? And these are the approaches that I describe in my book. Like, do you want to build a big moonshot? Well, and of course, like, if you do the big moonshot, then, that might come with like, lots of layoffs or restructuring. But that's not what I see typically. What I see more typically is this divide and conquer approach, where you basically still like, keep the same level of employees. It's more about, okay, either like staying competitive without growing the headcount even further, or by, just being more innovative, providing a better customer experience, or, creating new products, and generally like looking more at that innovation angle, or cutting costs on external suppliers. That's also a very common case that I see. But I think like, just making sure that you assess those two tracks differently in terms of the impact, and also like, the ethical components to that, I think that's really important.
Yeah, you talk a lot about identifying high leverage AI opportunities in businesses, and we'll come to it, get a bit deeper into that. But before that, tell me why most companies are trying to imitate the big tech playbook, and in your view, why does that backfire?
So I think this is not really new to AI. Like, we have seen this already in the past decade, like companies trying to do, for example, the OKR, like objective key results, because Google is doing OKR. So like we have also to do, we have to do it because Google is successful. We also want to be successful, or new work, so you have like bicycles and, like all these cool workplace environments, because like the big tech companies are doing it. So they are looking at these because these are also those companies that have an extremely high like market value and are extremely profitable and so on. But I think, what often gets mixed up is like the effect and the cause. A lot of these things, those companies can do because they are so successful, and maybe not the other way around. And especially with AI, of course, like, AI originates in these big tech companies from a technology standpoint. Like Google, like invented the transformer architecture, like OpenAI made ChatGPT and so on. And so, of course, because these are the creators of those technologies, people are looking at these creators to ask them, okay, how could we use those technologies in the most effective way or in the best way? But what I find surprising is that, just because you are a creator of something does not mean that you are the best person who understands how to use your creations. So to give you an example, right, you could think that, okay, Google invented the transformer architecture, which is the basis of every large language model that we see today. So you might figure out or think, well, they should know how to use generative AI, right? But maybe a few of you have seen that when Google first launched their generative AI search feature in Google Search, which was like a few months back, it was a complete disaster, right? There was lots of misinformation, lots of wrong information. There were lots of memes about that. So, just Google for cheese that is glued on pizza, and you will find tons of story around that. So yeah, they have not figured it out, right? They are still trying to figure it out. And also look at other companies, like you look at Apple, for example, what they do. Like at some areas, they really nailed it. They're really good. If you look at, for example, Face ID, which is like a prime example for integrating AI, and it's really good and useful. Siri, on the other hand, it's more complicated, I would say. So like we have these big tech companies that are very often like at the forefront of innovation, but that does not make them automatically the best kind of like, consultant to look at when it comes to adopting that. Because way that these big companies often operate is that, and look at the example of Meta, they just throw immense sums of money at certain problems and then hoping that something sticks, right? I mean, Meta can just, afford to spend like 50 billion on AI and hope that, they get some return out of that. Like, if they spend 50 billion and it's all going to waste, like they will probably still survive. They have a really, really profitable business model. I don't know any other single company from a non-tech sector that can easily spend 50 billion just on, figuring out what else will stick for that, right? So these are certain bets that only these companies can take. So I think it's not advisable to follow their track, but instead figure out, okay, how can you use these obviously useful technologies that they have created, but then implement them in a way that it really helps your own business. And that requires, a lot of trial and error experimentation, but also like a lot of domain knowledge and business knowledge about what are you actually doing and how is your own business actually operating. And I think this is really what it comes down to. So you have to understand that. And then technology is kind of like, one part of that, but really figuring that part out first. I think this is what, sets you apart. And then the ability to execute on that, of course.
Yeah, makes sense. And let's dive a bit deeper into that process, right? So when I talk to customers, right? So there are two kinds. One are like, hey, our board has asked us do something with AI. What do we do with AI? Right. And then they will probably check, okay, what are the competitors doing in this space? Or what are other companies doing in the industry? And try to imitate that. And there's another part where customers might have tried some POCs. They were unsuccessful to take them to production for whatever reason. Like there are tons of reasons why they don't. Take us through the step-by-step process of identifying the right use cases within the business and then how to kind of take it to successful implementation.
So, like, especially for generative AI, of course, everyone is kind of like figuring out, right?
Yeah.
But at least what I've seen has a really high chance of success, at least from my own consulting work, is the following process. And that's actually the exact same one that I describe in the book. So, phase 0, I would call it, is define your ambition level. Like, what do you actually, like, why are you here for? Like, what do you want to get out of AI? Because it makes it like big difference whether you want to go for a moonshot, which involves like spending a high budget on R&D, or whether you're more like opportunistically driven. That means like there's no R&D budget. Everything that you do has to get your return of investment. And for the opportunistic aspect, of course, you would just see, okay, what's working, and you would always be lagging behind the market and the competition. But the middle ground, that's what I also describe in the book, Divide and Conquer, is you spend a little bit of money on R&D, but most of your cases should be profitable. So if you have this approach, then the very first step, and that's then phase 1, is to kind of like look systematically in your business, what are big problem or opportunity areas. And that's what I describe at looking at pain points, things that are like hurting your business right now, and then bottlenecks, things that like limit future growth. And of course, that kind of like ties back to what's your overall business strategy? Like, do you have a goal for growth? Do you have a cost reduction goal? Like, do you need to survive in a market that is more or less, horizontal? So that's the initial starting point. So, and depending on your position, if you're the CEO or a business leader or a product leader, you start with your own like piece of the organization, and that's where you mine and look for problems. So far, that's what every consultant is telling you. That's nothing new, right? Look for problems first. But then what I figured out is, once you have identified a good set of problems, what's equally important is to define a custom value threshold. What is this? What is a value threshold? This is, basically something that you want to get out of AI on a minimal basis. Because there's no, and I mentioned that before, there's no such case where you just go somewhere, you implement, some plug and play vendor solution and it makes you like, 100K per year on additional profit. Just doesn't exist. At least I haven't seen that. So you typically need to invest in those cases, not only or not necessarily with a lot of budget, but with brain and human resource power, right? You have to sit down, understand the concept, make a concept, maybe think about a pilot, do a prototype. Like doing a prototype these days is really simple, but like, figuring out which prototype to do, that's actually the hard part. So you have to define like a minimal threshold. And that's where I used the 10K threshold that I also describe in the book, which means essentially that whatever you do with AI, kind of like every use case has to at least pass that threshold. And the most minimal is 10K per year, which like, it relates to, 10K means like one full-time equivalent per month. And if you have K per year, that's just a fraction of a full-time equivalent over the whole year. And then this gives you, first of all, alignment between business stakeholders. So everyone is clear on what threshold we are crossing, because sometimes people might look for the big cases. In other scenarios, people are just happy if they don't pay for the AI solution, but the AI solution just pays for itself. So having this alignment really is critical. And once you have the use case, once you have the problems that are above this threshold, like that are bigger than this threshold, you are in the right framing of then in the next steps looking at how could AI potentially help to solve that problem. Is it a good AI use case? Is it not a good AI use case? To do the mapping, collect all the different opportunities in your field of responsibility, then come up with the prioritization, where also the threshold will help you, because now you know whether it's, just like slightly crossing the threshold multiple times, or if it's very highly over the threshold. And then going up with the implementation, which in the end means like iterating and improving. So you have to build the prototype first and then figure out, okay, how to bring that prototype into production. These are the classical steps. But at the beginning, it's super, super important to have this kind of like value threshold baked in, because otherwise you will not have like an alignment in your organization that is like looking at the same amount or like same granularity of use cases. Some people will find their own use case super important, but then it turns out, well, that saves us only maybe 50 hours every year or so, while other use cases that have potentially like, a 1,000 hour or 10,000 hour per year impact are kind of like neglected because they feel too complicated. But guess what? That's the goal of the roadmap, to take this case and break it down into different delivery increments and say, okay, this is step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that we will do in order to get to this final state. So that's the process that I'm following, and so far, it's been working quite well. And I also describe it in my book, basically in more detail than what I just said here.
Great. In your view, what is a quick way to test whether a use case can be solved by AI?
So you have to differentiate between like use cases that can be solved with a like AI as a service solution, like generative AI or an LLM, or use cases that need custom AI training. So use cases that need custom AI training, like forecasting things, or predictive models, there isn't really a quick way to try it out. You have to invest a lot of money first, or effort, into getting the data into the right shape to train a model and then figure out if it actually works. This is why there were really, really few use cases before, being evaluated with AI. However, now with generative AI and AI as a service in general, there is a much bigger opportunity to test this out really quickly. The easiest thing you can always do is, to take something and, just throw it inside ChatGPT and see how good ChatGPT is out of the box on handling these tasks. If you find out that, it's absolutely crushing it, it doesn't mean that it will work on every single variation of that data that you put in there, but it gives you a certain first indication. On the other hand side, if you have no clue how, for example, a piece of software like ChatGPT would now help you solve that problem, well, it won't get much easier down the road. Right? So you have to figure out how can you bring these AI as a service solutions in there. And this could be ChatGPT, it could be Copilot, it could be a very simple Power Automate workflow, like whatever is like really easy for you to test it out. And just see how good the AI performs on your data, because that's the initial baseline that you have. From there, it will get much harder, but it won't get easier. So don't make the assumption that, just by bringing in more data or, by doing more engineering around it, the thing will get easier. It probably won't get easier, but that's kind of like the minimal effort baseline that you have. And always start at the beginning, trying with very low integration and very, very low automation, so that, the beginning to test the feasibility is always advisable. Just like do things that involves copy pasting work, like mimicking the workflow, how it would later be with AI, but getting a certain feel for, okay, how would the AI workflow later on actually work? Because that's probably also how it's gonna work, just in a more like automated way. But if it's not working in a manual way right now, well, it won't work in an automated way later either. So this is where I think it comes down really to being like at the beginning super pragmatic and also, hands-on on trying these solutions out. Because it's not like, oh, there's, this magic AI coming later on that will now solve all the problems. Well, that's not going to happen. Like you have that magic AI, right now, at least for these generative AI or LLM cases, so to say.
Yeah, I think you kind of describe it in terms of how to separate shiny AI demos from real business use cases, right? And through the process that you described earlier, I think there would be a way of creating a roadmap for a business on what are the AI use cases and how you
Mhm.
basically take them from ideation to implementation throughout a roadmap. But I often see organizations struggle to align teams and to drive the right outcomes. In your experience, what has been the most effective way to bring that alignment and deliver successful results with AI?
Yeah, before you deliver successful results, you have to have a good discovery structure. Because when it comes to building AI solutions or AI powered products, there are essentially two phases. Like the first phase is the discovery phase. This involves everything from ideation to concept to piloting, building the prototype and everything, which is most easily done with a very small team. So, light governance, maybe even no governance at all, or very, very, very light. Have a small, two pizza rule team that is able to go from ideation to prototype or, piloting really, really fast based on what you have on the roadmap. Of course, not just trying out random stuff, but working through the plan, the roadmap that you have in a really agile and really fast way. So that's phase one. And a lot of companies actually pretty good in doing that, because they assemble teams in the form of project teams or project groups and so on. It's like, it has a very light time limited scope. So, that's typically not a problem. The problem happens, if someone says, all right, that seems to work. So now can we build it? Because what you then do is you switch from a discovery to a delivery organization. So that means once you identified, okay, there's potential, AI solution is working as expected. We see that like the business impact is there. Like, for example, there's good user feedback and there are like different, criteria. There's a checklist also in my book on, when to go to the delivery phase. But once you pass these checks and you move to delivery, the whole game changes because right now you have to actually bring in more governance and more also alignment with the organization. You also have to bring in more budget and plan for it for a longer period of time. And at least at this point, you need to have a good business case because otherwise you won't be able to get the budget for that solution because there will be ongoing costs. There will be either subscription costs or API costs. There will be maintenance costs. You will probably need to get people or a certain amount of resources allocated to these projects. So you have to have a good business case for that. Otherwise, no one will go into these projects. And if you have this delivery organization, you have to have a certain permanent ownership of that use case. So what does not happen or what is not possible to have people sitting inside the discovery and the delivery process at the same time. And this is where I see organizations are not ready for that because they are ready for these let's do something, hackathons, innovation things, and they assign people temporarily. But when it comes to, okay, let's build it out, and we want to have this solution, they don't have the internal setup for this. And the path forward that I see is actually, there are two things you can do at the very beginning. Either you build up this central delivery unit. This is where companies build these, AI factories or AI center of excellence units that also have engineering, headcount in them. So that's option one. But the most common that I see is just getting a contractor or a vendor in that is building the tool. But this only brings you so far because it's pretty costly to do that for a long time. And B, you don't learn anything from that as an organization. So if you just outsource all your deliveries to someone else, you don't feedback. There's no feedback loop to your discovery pipeline. You're not learning essentially as an organization. So giving that to outside contractors, you can start with that, but that's nothing that would be sustainable. So you need to be able to at some point enable the organization to build these things by yourself, or at least to build on top of existing solutions. Because that's also what I see, especially for these high ROI use cases. There are so many things out there that get you to a certain level, but then the last mile needs to be customized or needs to be done by someone, and that someone better is you because you have to your business, right? And you should be able to implement that in a way. And yeah, so this is where it breaks, but I think organizations can you can build that maturity over time. And yeah, this is where things either fall apart or they really scale up and bring you financial success.
Yeah, talking about maturity. So I see organizations are always on different levels of maturity, right? So be it data, AI, or
Mhm.
any other technology. Um, in your experience, where have you seen the difference between organizations who are kind of stuck in pilots and POCs and can't make it to production, and the ones who have actually been successful?
So the ones that are successful are the ones that have also had a high like data maturity before. But interestingly, that's not because you'd say, oh yeah, they have a high data maturity, so they have a high AI maturity because like, the data is so good. But actually, that's not really the point. The point is that in their data analytics maturity evolution, those companies have learned to build certain use cases or capabilities under uncertainty, because that's also what you have in data projects. You have a very high degree of uncertainty. You don't know what the data looks like until you actually bring it to a warehouse, or you migrate it, or, do something with it. And that is very similar to AI. Figuring out the working mode for handling projects that have a very high uncertainty. This is what sets these businesses apart. If you have a very low data maturity, that very often correlates highly with organizations that are used to deliver, projects in a very waterfall way of planning and saying, okay, that's what we want to have, these are the resources, and in 1 year it's done. But AI and data, and especially AI projects, they don't work that way. Instead of saying, okay, these are the requirements and in 1 year we are done, you have to approach them more from seeing this kind of potential, let's say maybe K or 1 million impact per year, and we want to iterate towards that. So we're giving us now, maybe 3 months time of a first iteration sprint. And this iteration sprint must not cost more than maybe 20K or so, because that's a certain percentage of the overall value that we're achieving. And we have a certain outcome that we get from this sprint. Could be a learning, could be a delivery increment or whatsoever. And then after that, you will reassess the whole situation. So instead of sitting there in January and making a concrete plan of, what to do over the next year in terms of building features, you rather sit down and say, okay, how many iterations can we afford as an organization, given the potential that we see there? And this is actually really similar to how you would approach data projects, where you say, okay, we, for example, we want to have that centralized customer data platform, but we don't really know exactly what it takes to get there. We do have a certain idea about the value that we get out of that. We kind of spend some money as an investment to kind of build the first increment, or integrate the first 2 or 3 systems. That's also how you operate there, right? You don't just take all of your systems and migrate them at the same time, but you start with maybe 2 or 3 systems, and you bring one more system to it, and so on, depending on the use cases that you have. And that kind of maturity is very similar in those aspects. But again, not because of the actual data quality. That certainly helps, but the organizational component is a much bigger leverage in my experience.
Yeah. I start small, build end to end in slices, right? So I think that's...
And also make sure that, whatever you build can sustain on it by itself. I give you an example. I worked with a call center company, and this call center company, of course, wanted to have the automated AI chatbot, with their voice chatbot with their customers, right? That was kind of the high business impact opportunity there. But of course, it had very low feasibility, because there's a ton of things that you have to consider before you do these voice bots. So instead of saying, okay, we spend a big R&D budget and figuring out how to build that voice bot, we said, okay, what could be increments to go there, right? And increments obviously were that at the first iteration, we, just build a very simple knowledge base that, people human agents that, entered the company could use to be onboarded more quicker. So they could look for information instead of reading through those manuals. They could just, chat with these documents. And then the next iteration was to embed or to augment this inside the call. So when there was a human operator on the phone, and they had a client and they needed to look up some information, they would not need to go through their old search engine, but they could use basically the underlying backend from that chatbot to get that information really fast. And then the next iteration was to transcribe the call that is coming in real time, and have the AI proactively come up with with information that is relevant to the current call. And then the next increment was to have a chatbot on the website, having the conversation automatically, but without the voice component. And then the voice component would be the final piece of that, right? So this is how you can say, even if we don't get there to the final stage of the AI voice agent, we have built value, along the way. And even if all the other things don't work, these things in themselves are valuable, and they are still there and still being used, right? And I think this is really important. And sometimes I have this image or metaphor of, if you do the rock climbing, right, and you put the safety things in there, so whenever you fall down, at least there's a certain baseline, and at least you climbed a little step higher, right? So I think this is one of the maybe mental pictures to have. At least in most cases, it's not as critical as you fall down and you're dead. So that's the good thing. But still, you have to have these checkpoints in there and make sure that wherever you are, like you can also stay at that level and rest a little bit, and then that's totally fine because you made progress.
Absolutely. I think this is super useful. One of the things I tell readers as well, that going in increments not only help you to fail fast, so you realize early that this is not going to work, but you also doing all of these iterative experiments, you build the muscle. Like it's like
Exactly.
going to the gym, right?
And you also get better at planning. You get better at actually like defining the scope of work and what to do. And this is like typically where I'm in, especially at the beginning, to help them, come up with the requirement document and set expectations of what to do in the sprint. But once they have done a couple of sprints by themselves, they are much more confident to say, okay, that's what we're planning for the next quarter, for example. At the very beginning, it's super hard, right? But it's interesting to see, like, after organizations have been doing this process for maybe 1 or 2 years, and, assuming that people stayed there, because not like you've left the company. So let's say the knowledge is still there. They, as you say, they build the muscle to, work in that agile way. But it takes time. Like it's nothing that you learn by watching a Scrum course or so. Like you have to like do that by yourself and then, do it actually, which is the hard part.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we are in November now. January is fast approaching, 2026. A lot of businesses are going to look into the new year and say, okay, what are we going to do with AI?
Yeah.
So can you give some advice, tough love to to leaders in businesses on how they should start the new year?
Oh, yeah. So what I would say is, however you position yourself in your company, prepare for failure, like prepare for failure of the AI market. So I see a lot of organizations like building their AI strategy around the positive hype right now. For example, a good example of that is like our goal is to embed AI in all our processes, which is, in my opinion, BS. It makes sense as long as AI has this like, connotation with, oh, that's something cool and everyone is doing that. But what happens next year if one of the big AI players is, kind of like crumbling or maybe even like, totally failing, and then, the market is going down. Like now you have this negative, AI thing, and then everyone's like, oh yeah, do we really want to have that in all our processes, right? So prepare for failure. Like, 2025 was the year of the hype. But I think like 2026, there will be some kind of like consolidation. So hype will further cool down, and you want to make sure that your AI roadmap is still like, going on and thriving. So how can you do that? Assume that there's just like the mental picture for that is like there's a certain potential out there right now, what technology can do, and there's stuff that your business needs right now. So how do you bring that together? So don't plan for like the next big model or the next iteration or the agentic futures where robots are doing all the work. If that happens, it should benefit you, but it's not something that you should plan for. So instead, focus on how can we make whatever is out there most efficient right now to help us solve the problems that we already have right now. And this typically means building on the models and all the capabilities that you have out there right now. That's component number one. And also number two, making sure that you put in some, safety checks or, some like resilient, resilient components, which in the end means like be ready to run AI workloads offline. So be ready to take certain AI workloads that you found super critical. And I'm not talking about ChatGPT in the personal productivity cases. I'm talking about where your organization needs to process 50,000 of, highly, complex insurance documents or so at scale and extract certain values at a very high accuracy level. And you use maybe AI for that. Like prepare to own those workflows. Maybe like, during these times you rely on a third party vendor for that, or maybe you rely on, some API calls that you make somewhere. But what happens, for example, if the prices suddenly go up for this API? Like it's not set in stone that these prices that we have right now will always be the same. Or what do you do if the models suddenly require, 10 or even 100 times of the token count? So saying the prices stay the same, but the tokens that get produced are suddenly, 10 or 100 times higher. So how do you prepare for that? And the only reason for that is kind of like to lock the actual state in. That means having certain AI models that don't change no matter what, because you control them, you own them. And that typically ends in, having certain AI workloads that you run locally or offline in your organization, or having long-term contracts in place. But I do recommend figuring out where can it make sense to have AI running like locally on premise or at least on data centers that you can control. because this gives you planability. And, no matter what happens there, and there's always drama in the AI world, and no matter what drama happens, you can just like go on, right? And just continue to produce value for your organization without getting, being distracted and having these conversations. Oh, should we still use OpenAI models because OpenAI is XYZ, right? So you don't want to have these conversations. And that's why I think, of course, it's important, for discovery sessions to, build on these tools. And there will be ChatGPT that you use for the best and frontier models and so on, or Copilot or whatever. But for these quote unquote, like boring, under the hood workflows, you want to make sure that you have really ownership and sovereignty over those. And, that might lead to owning some of them locally or having other, contract work in place. But I think this is important to prepare for that.
Makes sense. I want to switch towards a little different angle here. You are in AI consulting, and a number of my community members and people I talk to, they show a lot of interest in consulting in AI. And I think that's because of the reason that there's been a lot of businesses approaching to independent consultants for consulting in AI. What is your thought about that? And if someone wanted to do that, what is the mechanism to get in there and do their, switch to independent consulting?
Well, I mean, the first question is like, do you want to do that? Because like, of course, like being an independent consultant, it can be super fun. Like, you get to work with like lots of clients directly. You have the 100% the client relationship. But everyone who has done independent consulting also knows that, delivery is just really one small part of the whole job, right? The other part is actually like, figuring out, of course, how to get contracts, how to scope contracts, and also, like if you are an independent consultant, there are typically only so many clients you can handle at the same time, right? So there's a certain like reliance on these, like, bigger contracts. And I think it definitely, it's cool to explore it if you're like, up for it, but I would not suggest it as a default career path for everyone. Like, because like you have to say that there are already thousands of, consulting companies out there, and kind of you're competing with all of them. And every consulting company that I talk to, they are looking for employees. So, I think there are also good job opportunities, like besides being independent. But what I do see is the big trend of having more AI consulting expertise outside of the big 5 or, 6 consulting houses out there. Just because, like a lot of people assume that, because these companies are really big, they are actually the best ones to tell you what to do with AI and not. But like, to be honest, like, that's not the case. Like, just because you have 100,000 employees doesn't mean that you're the best person to talk to for this specific use case. So there are tons of like also great consulting houses that I have worked with that are either specialized in certain domains or specialized in certain technological areas, or even like position themselves in a way that they say, okay, like for example, we do implementation for Microsoft products, but we do certain things differently than Microsoft is, for example, recommending them, because like Microsoft also has a certain interest on sell you certain things, right? So, and I think this is where like this independent consultant is really, really becoming important for like smaller consulting companies. But if you're looking at the kind of like individual contributor role or individual consulting role, oh yeah, I mean, be prepared. That's quite tough market out there, like especially with AI, like, and make no mistake, like even AI is, even especially consulting is one of the industries I would say is mostly disrupted by AI, because before it was kind of hard, to maybe, come up with some code that is doing something, or maybe it was hard to come up with, a 50 slide deck presentation that is telling a good story. Nowadays, well, you can just do that free of charge. Like, it's like there's no moat anymore. Of course, it depends on the quality, still makes a difference. But from a client perspective, that just wants to get a certain job done, or they want to have a certain answer on something, the entry barrier is now much lower. And I think this is like, everyone should be aware of that before, they say, oh yeah, I also want to do that. And yeah, this is just one thing I would say here.
No, that's really good advice. I think, by default, thinking about switching to consulting without looking at the risks and what's actually happening on the ground is really important to assess that. So no, thank you for that. All right, let's move to the rapid fire round, which is pretty fun. I love this section. I'll ask you 5 questions and just answer whatever comes to your mind first. Are you ready?
Well, I guess so.
Yeah. What's the biggest AI myth you wish you could delete from the internet?
The biggest is that probably AI is smarter than any human.
Good. Which industry is secretly the most exciting AI playground right now?
Finance.
Love it. I work in finance as well. If AI had a personality, what would it be? Introvert, extrovert, or chaotic, neutral?
Schizophrenic? Is that a possibility?
Obviously,
Yeah.
yeah.
It would be. It would be schizophrenic.
Yeah. One AI tool you can't live without.
To be honest, ChatGPT. Yeah, 100%.
If you could rename artificial intelligence, what would you call it?
Let's call it profitable intelligence.
Nice. Nice. That's a good one. Okay. Love it. Thank you, Tobias. Before we leave, just tell us who should read your book, where they can reach out for the book, and what are the takeaways from the book that they should expect when they read it.
Yeah, sure. So I think the book will be valuable for, generally business leaders, especially if you're inside an organization and you are tasked with doing AI or, getting the organization on the AI path. So this book will essentially give you a roadmap for doing that. But also if you're in a consulting business, you're doing consulting, I think you can use lots of these frameworks because I've been using them as well. So you could just use them if you like that too. Or if you're just generally an AI enthusiast and you just want to dig deeper into those topics. So I think this is really good. Otherwise, you will find it on Amazon and everywhere they sell books. Just search for Profitable AI and the book should come up. And otherwise, feel free to subscribe to my newsletter, which I write every week. And you can also find that, just Google for Profitable AI and my name and should come up on Google.
Nice. Tobias, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Sandy. It was great being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks.